Hi all, in this video I'm going to talk about the advantages and disadvantages of shares in general. So the first advantages of shares is it helps in raising capital. Through the issue of shares, the company can raise huge amounts of capital from the public. Further, the cost which is involved in raising this capital is also less in the sense that where the shareholders are generally paid only when the company makes profits. So it does not issue of shares does not create any fixed obligation for the company, and dividend is paid to the shareholders only when sufficient profits is earned by the company. Even after earning sufficient profits, sometimes the management of the company may decide to issue or give a lesser amount of dividend so that the remaining profit can be utilized again for the growth aspect prospects for the of the company. Next we have is the it is a source of long-term finance. Generally, the shares are not paid back during the lifetime of the company. Okay, they except in the case of redeemable preference shares, all the other forms of shares are generally paid only at the time of liquidation or winding up of the company. Therefore, the issue of shares enables a company to procure long-term finance. Next is the issue of shares enhances the credit worthiness of the company. See, when capital is raised by issuing shares, the assets position of the company is not affected, which means that issue of shares does not create any charge on the assets of the company. Okay, creating charge on the assets of the company means that no shares have to be issued as a security to the shareholders when we are issuing shares. So therefore, this enhances the credit worthiness of the company. Next is the issue of shares does not create a charge on the assets of the company. Unlike in the case of debentures, when we are issuing debentures, certain assets have to be kept as aside for the paying the debenture holders in the event of winding up the company. Like supposing if I'm issuing 30 lakh worth of debentures, then the 30 lakh worth of shares has to be kept aside, which means that I cannot sell the asset which is kept aside, nor can I raise further funds by giving the asset as mortgage. This asset has to be kept aside so that in the event of winding up, if there is any loss which the company suffers and it is not able to pay the debenture holders, then this asset can be sold in order to pay the debenture holders. So such an obligation is not there in the case of shares. When a company issues shares, it does not have to create any charge or keep aside any assets on the of the company. Next is cost of capital. Now, equity share capital is less expensive compared to borrowed capital. It is considered, since it is equity shares are considered as ownership securities. Therefore the shareholders are paid only when the company makes profits. The shareholders cannot claim any dividends when the company is not making any profit. And even if we raise capital through the by borrowing loans from the banks, the cost of borrowed capital from banks also will be much higher compared to the cost of shares. Further, since the shareholders are the owners of the company, therefore they enjoy voting rights. The decision or the opinion of the shareholders has to be solicited on all the matters which affect the company. Lastly, growth advantage. In the case of debentures, the rate of interest is fixed, so the company is obliged to pay the rate of fixed rate of interest. Whereas in the case of shares, only when the company makes profit, the shareholders will get returns in the form of dividends. Further again, the rate of dividend keeps varying depending on the profits of the company. When the profits are more, the rate of return to the shareholders is also more, and when the profits are less, the rate of return is less. Further, sometimes even in the years when the company is making huge profits, the management of the company can still hold back a great portion of the profits by giving the shareholders a lesser rate of dividend and telling them that the remaining portion of the profits is utilized, maybe for the expansion projects of the company and the like. So therefore, these are some of the advantages of shares. Let's look into the disadvantages of shares. The first disadvantage of shares is the issue of shares is a demanding and time consuming process. Whenever an initial public offer is made for the shares, that is an IPO for the shares is listed, it involves huge number of formalities, permissions, and you have to be obtained from the registrar of companies. Further, the company has to enter into agreements with the banks so that the financial transactions regarding the issue of shares can be made. and other our other underwriters have to be appointed, and other umpteen number of formalities have to be complied with. So therefore the issue of shares is a time consuming process, and it is also a demanding process because the focus of the management is shifted on from the core activities of the business, that is rather than focusing on production, financing, marketing, operations of the business, the focus is more only on one aspect of the business operations, that is on procuring funds from the public. Therefore, that's why the issue of shares is demanding as well as a time consuming process. Next is overcapitalization. When the shares are issued, sometimes it so happens that the issue of shares raises more capital, which results in overcapitalization for the company. Overcapitalization is a situation where the capital which is borrowed from the public is more than that is required, which is required in the company for its operations. So when there is excess capital, it creates an obligation for the company to pay dividends even to the idle capital which is remaining in the company. This situation puts down the morale of shareholder investors as they will be getting less dividend, and it is also very difficult to overcome such a situation of overcapitalization. Next is inflexibility of capital structure. The capital structure of a company reflects the various sources of funds which from which the company has obtained the capital. So as the shares once issued cannot be paid back till the liquidation or the winding up of the company, therefore the capital structure of the company becomes very rigid. Okay, and generally the capital structure of a company consists of equity and debt sources of finance. And generally for an ideal capital structure, the company should raise 60% of its funds by through equity shares or equity care sources, and 40% through debt sources. And once this ratio is altered, it is very difficult to again bring it back to the optimum capital structure. Next is legal hurdles. The companies have to oblige with various legal formalities when they are issuing shares. Like some companies cannot issue equity shares until they have incorporated or registered. So basically, since a company has 4 stages in its formation, that is promotion, incorporation, capital subscription, and commencement of business. So unless the first two stages have been fully complied with, that is promotion and incorporation, the company cannot proceed with the issue of shares. So these are some of the legal hurdles. Next is recession period management. Recession period is a period during which the business operations are at a slack or at their lowest. So in such a situation, it is very difficult for the companies to make profit or to make earnings. And since the earnings will be less during the recession period, the rate of dividend is also less. And when the rate of dividend paid to the shareholders is less, this results in fall or reduction in the market price of the shares. And when there is a reduction in the market price of the shares, the net worth of the company also comes down. So therefore, during the recession period, management of shares becomes very difficult. And lastly, loss on liquidation. Liquidation means winding up of the company. Now, the shareholders will be paid back the capital only when they are winded up, or when liquidation happens. And even at during that stage, preference is not given to to repay back the capital first to the shareholders. First, the preference will be given to pay back the capital of the creditors, the debenture holders, and thereafter it will be if any capital is remaining in the company, then it will be used to pay back the shareholders. These are some of the disadvantages of shares.